The horizon lay cracked and bruised beneath the amber dusk, its silence broken only by the restless rustle of prairie wind through dry sage. Rhett Callahan rode alone as he had done for years, his horse slow, his back straight, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a weather-worn hat. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the trail that wound toward his ranch. He hadn't spoken to another soul in nearly a week, not since trading cattle at Dry Hollow, and he hadn't missed the sound of voices. But something shifted that evening, like the land itself was holding its breath. It was a scrap of red that caught his eye first. Silk, torn and fluttering from the branch of a mesquite bush like a forgotten prayer. A step further and he saw her. She was barely more than a bundle of bones and torn fabric, curled in the dirt beside the trail. Her cheek was bloodied, lip cracked, the back of her dress ripped at the seam. A single shoe dangled from her foot. Rhett dismounted slowly, dust rising from his boots. He approached like one might approach a wounded coyote, careful, silent, not yet sure if it was alive. Her chest moved, shallow but steady. One eye flickered open, black and glassy like polished onyx, and locked on his face. No scream, no sound. Just that gaze, stripped of fear, stripped of everything. He could have ridden on. The thought came like a whisper echoing in the skull. No law said he had to stop. But the moment passed like a cloud across the sun, and he found himself bending down, arms slipping beneath her shoulders, lifting her weightless frame like a sack of grain. She didn't resist. When he placed her in the wagon, she didn't speak, didn't cry. Just turned her head away from the light and closed her eyes, the torn scarf still clenched in one hand. Rhett didn't ask her name. And she didn't offer one. By the time they reached the ranch, the stars were opening above them. His home stood low and squat between the hills, wood pale with age, the windows glowing faint behind curtains bleached by years of solitude. The windmill creaked. The cattle were settled. And now there was her. He laid her on the cot in the spare room, lit the oil lamp, and backed out with the sound of her soft, steady breath trailing behind him like a thread. Something about it caught in his chest and held tight. He didn't sleep that night. By morning she hadn't moved. But when Rhett placed a tin cup of water on the bedside crate, her eyes blinked open again. She sat up slowly, sipping the water like it might disappear. Still no words. He offered food, a crust of bread and some beans. She looked at the bowl, then at him. There was something in her stare, something raw and unreadable. Like she was trying to measure the cost of kindness. It took a full day before she stepped outside. She stood on the porch in a borrowed dress that hung loose from her frame, her eyes scanning the land like a creature checking for traps. Rhett was mending fence posts a few yards off. He didn't look up. Neither did she speak. But they shared the air. That was something. That night, as he sipped coffee alone in the kitchen, he found her folding the torn curtain that used to hang in the parlor. Her fingers moved with quiet precision, threading the needle like she'd done it 1,000 times. She didn't ask permission. He didn't offer it. Still, when she was done, she left the cloth on the table between them. "Thank you," he said, unsure why his voice felt so heavy. She only bowed her head. It wasn't until 3 days later that the sheriff came. Sheriff Amos Creed wasn't a man who knocked politely. His boots stomped across the porch like they belonged there. Rhett met him at the door, one hand resting on the frame. "Rhett," Creed said with a nod. "Heard you brought someone in." Rhett's jaw shifted, but he didn't answer. "She Chinese?" Creed asked, eyes scanning the house behind him. Rhett didn't blink. "She's a person." Creed's mouth tightened. "You know how folks get. You keep her here, there'll be talk. Trouble. You don't need that." "I don't need your advice either," Rhett said, stepping out just enough to make his point. Creed glanced over his shoulder, spit in the dirt, and tipped his hat. "Suit yourself." When Rhett returned inside, she was standing by the window. She'd heard every word. He thought she might cry. Instead, she picked up a kettle and walked outside to draw water. Later, when the storm rolled in, she woke screaming. Rhett was halfway to her door before he knew what he was doing. He paused, hand hovering just above the wood. The silence inside grew heavy. He didn't knock. Instead, he fetched the lantern and left it burning by her bed. She never thanked him. But the next morning, a fresh biscuit was left on the kitchen table. Still warm. By the end of the week, she was tending the chickens. He watched her from the shade of the barn. Her steps were slow, careful, and she hummed softly under her breath. A tune foreign and mournful, like something carried across oceans. She didn't notice him listening. Or maybe she did. At the general store in town, Rhett heard whispers. Lila May, the widow who ran the laundry, approached him while he loaded salt and flour. "You keepin' her?" she asked, her voice low. Rhett didn't answer. She's not just some runaway, Lila said. They brought her here last year. House on the ridge. For men. Beat her near dead when she stopped earning. I heard she was left in the canyon. To die. Rhett gripped the sack of flour harder than he meant to. Don't let Creed scare you, Lila added. Town forgets it's got a soul. Sometimes takes someone wounded to remind us. He returned home slower that day. That evening she placed his worn boots by the hearth, cleaned and polished. He looked at her, truly looked, and she met his gaze with a quiet stillness. In my village, she said, her voice soft, women buried shame like seeds. But it always grows. Rhett couldn't speak. So he didn't. Sheriff Creed returned 2 days later. You're making people nervous, he said. They think you've lost your mind. Or worse, your loyalty. Rhett leaned against the post, hat low. She's done nothing wrong. She don't have to, Creed snapped. She's different. That's enough. I fought a war, Rhett said calmly. Saw men shot for looking different. Never thought I'd see the same sickness here. Creed's nostrils flared. But he left. That night, someone threw a rock at the gate. The clang echoed across the valley. She flinched, eyes wide, but didn't run. Rhett mended the fence quietly, cursing under his breath. She brought him water, her fingers brushing his. Just that, an accidental touch. But he stilled. So did she. The world held its breath. The next evening they sat near the fire. Not close. But near. She handed him a thin wooden case wrapped in cloth. Inside lay a calligraphy brush, old and delicate. My father's, she said. He taught me symbols. They are stories. She drew in the dirt, lines and curves, her hands steady, her eyes distant. This one means peace. Rhett stared at it a long while. Then he showed her a photograph from his wallet, faded, edges frayed. A woman with kind eyes. My wife, he said. Gone 5 years now. We never had children. She wanted to dance. We buried that dream in the grove. They sat in silence as the wind combed the wheat. No tears. Just time shared. Then came the night of fire. It started with a crack, then a glow. The barn lit up like a torch. Rhett ran toward it, rifle in hand, but shadows moved faster. Masked figures, 3 maybe 4. One slammed into him, knocking him down. Blood bloomed on his cheek. And then, May. She stood in the doorway, rifle in her shaking hands. The firelight painted her in red and gold, like a ghost made flesh. Leave, she shouted, her voice hoarse, or I shoot. The men hesitated. She didn't blink. They ran. When Rhett found his feet again, the barn was half gone. But she stood tall, eyes wide, hands trembling as she let the rifle fall. You could have died, he said. She looked at him, face unreadable. So could you. The fire smoldered into ash. The next morning she fed the chickens as if nothing had changed. But Rhett knew better. That evening he watched her from the porch as she danced, slow, barefoot in the field, hair loose, a smile ghosting across her lips. Not joy. Something gentler. Freedom, perhaps. He stepped into the wheat, boots crunching the dry stalks. She turned. And without a word they danced. No music. No ceremony. Just 2 lives quietly learning how to breathe again. No vows were spoken. But a promise lived in that silence. And sometimes silence says more than love ever could.